Have any of you, have you ever had your 15 seconds of fame? I mean, just think about it, most of you. I've had mine. One time I got over 100 likes on Facebook. I've been there. Mary Magdalene, she's getting her 15 seconds of fame again, but she's had it before. Way back in the 2nd century, there was a gospel that was written with her name on it. It said the gospel according to Mary Magdalene. And it declared Mary to be the apostle to the apostles. Think about that. Now, this disturbed a few people as the centuries went on. The male-dominated church said, we got to put a stop to that. And so Pope Gregory the Great, up in the 6th century, he erroneously, if not viciously, declared that Mary had been a demon-possessed prostitute. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's what he said. And that view of Mary has persisted for centuries. And in fact, the Catholic Church did not change its official stance about Mary until 1969. But by then, the damage had already been done. Her reputation is now what it is. But we could argue, however, that along with that pronouncement in 1969, Mary Magdalene has enjoyed a greater comeback than Tiger Woods last Sunday. And that was a good comeback. I'll give a few examples. There is the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. Remember that? Where this slightly confused but very devoted Mary sings, "I don't know how to love him." And now you're going to be singing that all day long, aren't you? There is many examples. There's a controversial book and movie called The Last Temptation of Christ. The movie came out in the 80s, where Jesus, his last temptation was actually to climb down from the cross and to spend a life in domestic tranquility with Mary Magdalene as his wife. You're more familiar, I'm sure, with the Dan Brown conspiracy novel, The Da Vinci Code, where Mary is portrayed as a little more than a friend to Jesus. Eventually, she becomes a mother to his child. And now, there is a movie. I'm still looking for it. It's supposed to be out any day now, called Mary Magdalene. The name of the movie, starring Rooney Mara. She plays the role of what we might call a first-century feminist and supporter of Jesus' message of love in the midst of violence. Now, here's the irony about this movie. It was produced by Harvey Weinstein's production company. And it was supposed to come out, I think, in January of 2018, perhaps. And, of course, that company went like that. So it's just now coming out. So you got to love Hollywood, right? All the irony in that. Now, all of that about Mary is very interesting. And yet Mary's greatest 15 seconds of fame occurred at the empty tomb, where she became the first witness to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I think it's funny, if not odd, or really actually sad, that for most of Christian history, women have been barred from the ranks of clergy and still are in many circles, although a woman was the first proclaimer of the good news of Jesus Christ. We tried to sweep that under the rug, did we not? Now, what we can say about Mary Magdalene in particular is something I think we can say about women in general in terms of their presence and their participation in the church, which is this quote, I'm sure you've heard, "Nevertheless, she persisted." Now, I know that's a politically charged phrase. You may remember a couple of years ago in 2017, there was this political altercation between Elizabeth Warren and Mitch McConnell over the nomination to the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions to the office of Attorney General. So there's a lot of, that kind of stuff going on. Like Hollywood, you got to love Washington, right? But after that, that phrase, nevertheless, she persisted, was picked up. And it was adopted by the wider feminist movement, particularly here in the United States. And it came alongside the real popular hashtags, hashtag Me Too and hashtag Time's Up. Hashtag nevertheless, she persisted is now used to refer to all women's persistence in breaking whatever barriers are out there, despite previously being silenced or ignored. Now, if anyone of the female gender has persisted, though, for a very long time, it is Mary Magdalene. She has stood the test of time. And we could argue that she is now more popular and appreciated than ever before in Christian history. And I think the current movie is just sort of proof of that and bears that out a little bit. Her persistence is clearly seen in the Gospel of John's rendition of the resurrection story. In that story, she really is the most persistent, the most devoted of all of Jesus' disciples. According to John's Gospel, which, by the way, differs in some of the details from the other three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Mary alone visits the tomb early that morning while it is still dark. Now, why so early in the morning? We can guess. Probably out of fear that someone would see her, fear that she could possibly be arrested, and maybe even worse. Now, the other Gospels claim that she and some other women came to the tomb that morning to put spices on Jesus' corpse, to be blunt about it. But I sort of have my historical doubts about that for a couple of reasons. Mainly because, at least in John's Gospel, we're told that they already did that the men had already prepared the body with the spices and so forth. And think about it, the other big reason is surely they assumed that the stone would still be in front of the tomb, that there's no way they could get to his body. So why would they show up carrying all these spices if they didn't think that they could actually go there? So I think instead that Mary, and maybe other women, but Mary went to the tomb simply in order to grieve. Much like you and I would do maybe a few days after a loved one has died. We go and we continue to grieve in that way. But when Mary arrives at the tomb, still under cover of the pre-dawn dusk, darkness, she notices that the large stone that had been in front of the tomb has actually been rolled away. And her first assumption is, man, they must have gone in there and taken his body. There's no way this thing would be open if his body's still in there. And so she is understandably bewildered. By the way, I want you to notice the connection between the words bewildered and wilderness. To be bewildered is to be in a mental and emotional wilderness. And that's where Mary is at this very moment. So she runs back to where the other disciples are hanging out to find Simon Peter and the other disciple, which some people say was actually a younger John. And she tells them, hey, the body is gone. It's missing. The stone is away. I don't know what happened, but something's amiss. So Peter and John, they say, well, let's go see for ourselves. We'll get there and figure it all out. Now, John, according to the story, was younger than Peter. And he was also the 100-meter track champion in his high school. And so he outruns this old man, Peter, to the tomb. And he discovers, it's empty. And then the old man, Peter, eventually catches up. He gets there. He's all out of breath. And, he looks in. He said, the body's gone. All they could see were the linen cloths that were laying there where the body should be. And so guess what these two grown men do? They go back home. Now, I'm sure they were distraught, disoriented, bewildered, confused, and all that as well. But what can they do? Plus, they probably don't want to be caught there either, because they have the same fears as everyone else. And so they leave. But Mary, who apparently had gone back to the tomb, she persists. She remains at the empty tomb, grieving openly. And she finally builds up the courage, I think, to look inside the tomb. And when she does, she sees a couple of figures in there, and they're dressed in white, and they ask her, why are you weeping? She says, well, they've taken Jesus' body and I don't know what they've done with it. Can you help me? And for some reason at that time, she turns around. Maybe she hears something and she sees a man she thinks is the gardener. Now she's thinking, this is the guy who's, there to clean up the mess that all the people left behind. And so he's keeping the place clean. It's the gardener. So she asks him, do you know where they took Jesus' body? And he responds by saying her name, Mary. Now remember, it's probably still a little dark out there, it's maybe lightening up a little bit. But this could explain three things. First, it might explain why Peter and John, perhaps, and even then Mary, had to enter into the tomb, the story says, to verify that it was empty, because from the outside you probably couldn't see on the inside what was in there. It was too dark. Secondly, this time of the day explains why Mary didn't freak out when she saw two angels sitting there in the tomb. Wouldn't you and I just sort of freak out a little bit? We saw a couple of guys in white, dressed in white. They got big old wings on them, whatever angels actually have. I don't know. But I'm sure they freaked out. She would have freaked out, but she didn't know it was angels. So, and third, I think this kind of dawnish darkness explains why Mary thought Jesus was a gardener. She just couldn't see him that well. And it wasn't until he uttered her name that she finally realized who he was. And so she immediately responds to him by saying, teacher, which is what you would call somebody as the leader of your community. There's a little bit of what we call Christology, or the doctrine of Christ, that sneaks into this story kind of out of nowhere. It's kind of interesting, addition. Jesus says to Mary at this moment, right? Imagine if you're Mary and you thought this guy's dead, and there he is. What would you want to do? You want to hug him, right? And he says, do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. The word ascending is important here because it suggests that Jesus is on his way to divinity. And it's an odd addition to this story. It's not found in any of the other three Gospels. And by the way, my mind plays funny tricks on me when I read biblical stories sometimes. When I read this story, I have this image in my head of Jesus standing in a hot air balloon. And the balloon is going up, and Mary's trying to latch on and say, let me go with you, let me go with you. And Jesus said, no, let go. You need to let go, because I need to go up. That's just how my mind works. I apologize. Nevertheless, she persisted. Not to hanging on to Jesus, but in the sense that she was the only one who hung in there and didn't just give up when she discovered that the tomb was empty. And she ultimately persisted by going back to the disciples and saying to them with confidence, I have seen the Lord. And that's why the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was written in the 2nd century, referring to her as the apostle to the apostles. That's why the misogynist Gregory the Great tried to discredit her in the 6th century. That's why she has had a central role in the Jesus book and movie genre in the 20th century, and that's why there is a movie out about her now in the aftermath of hashtag #MeToo, hashtag Times Out, and hashtag Nevertheless She Persisted. Mary Magdalene has become a feminist icon. But more importantly, I think, she has become an indispensable and indisputable Christian icon. She persisted. Pardon the pun, but after Jesus' crucifixion, she hung in there more persistently than all the other disciples. There are many lessons to learn from the resurrection story. A story that has inspired untold millions of people for the last 2,000 years. Because of this story, Christianity has persisted. But let us not forget the young woman whose undying love, inconsolable grief, unbounded curiosity, and unwavering devotion to Jesus made it all possible in the first place. Amen.